Welcome to my new Let's Play of Castlevania The Adventure. It's almost Halloween at the time of this upload, so I thought it'd be fun to revisit the Castlevania series with one of the more notorious entries. Castlevania The Adventure was released for the original Game Boy in 1989, but also was re-released for the Game Boy Color in the late 90s as part of the Konami Game Boy Collection Volume 1. This collection was only released in Japan and Europe, and not in North America, so this is a bit more of an obscure release, here at least. In general, I do like the Game Boy Color version because it makes some of the hazards easier to spot compared to in the black and white original Game Boy version, so that will make things a little bit easier later on. And this game definitely is challenging, so I need all the help I can get. Something else I've decided to use is a fan mod to make this a slightly easier experience as well. So for example, we play as Christopher Belmont in his quest to stop Dracula using the trusty vampire killer whip as per tradition for the Belmont family. In the original, every time you take damage, the vampire killer will lose an upgrade. That makes this a lot tougher, and this mod basically makes it so you will lose all of your power-ups when you lose a life, but you won't lose power-ups from simply taking any damage at all. So that will definitely make things a lot easier. This mod also increases Christopher's movement speed, because one of the biggest issues with this game in its original form is it doesn't run very well, and also Christopher moves extraordinarily slowly, so the combination of the slow walking speed and the constant slowdown in the game makes it very difficult to properly platform and dodge certain hazards. So hopefully this won't go too badly because of using the Game Boy Color version and also using this mod, but it's still a classic Castlevania game, so I do expect to lose a few lives along the way, maybe get a couple game overs even. We also have a time limit. I've actually never run out of time in these stages. There actually aren't that many stages either. It's a pretty short game, if it goes well. But that's assuming things actually go well, which they may or may not. You might also notice a lot of screen tearing. I actually can't think of any other Game Boy game that has screen tearing, and that is a problem with the original release as well. And I'm pretty sure they actually left that intact in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection, which includes all of the classic NES and Game Boy games except one, which is now deemed non-canon, Castlevania Legends. But yeah, those games are basically preserved as is, which means this game does not run particularly well on the collection for the sake of authenticity. Right now we're jumping across very narrow platforms, which is not easy with this slowdown, and also this bat flying around. So this is definitely a case where you definitely want to be careful, but also move quickly, because these will fall, and also it's very difficult to actually line up those jumps, because you actually have to kind of land on the platform for a bit before you have to move a bit before you jump, because it's still a Castlevania game. You can't influence your direction in mid-air, so we have to actually move a little bit before jumping on those. Once we collect this, the first boss appears, a knight. Overall, this is a very easy fight. We cannot use projectiles, but other than that, this is basically a piece of cake. So far, so good. We're moving on to stage 2, where things definitely get a little bit tougher. So we've collected a couple of orbs along the way. Those are the upgrades for the Vampire Killer. As you power it up, it eventually has a projectile attack, which is extraordinarily helpful, because we don't have sub-weapons. So we don't have any daggers or throwing axes or anything. So our only ranged attack is the fully powered up Vampire Killer, which is part of the reason why this mod is so helpful. So we don't have to worry about losing the projectiles, which definitely makes this a lot easier. These enemies are actually kind of annoying to fight, I find, partly just because of like the way their projectiles bounce around. I find it slightly unpredictable and difficult to dodge with all the slowdown. If you had like better movement, I do feel like dodging a lot of things would be easier. Like climbing down this took so long, we ended up taking damage. The Vampire Killer's projectiles do also break the enemy projectiles too, which is very helpful, so we don't have to like slowly make our way over to the enemy to defeat them. We can defeat them from a distance. Again, we actually do have to move a little bit before jumping across these, making this a little bit nerve-wracking as all of those platforms are falling. So we have more of these enemies. Again, luckily we can fight them at a distance, so that helps a little bit. In later stages, I definitely am a little bit worried about these enemies because in some cases they're positioned in such a way that their attacks are very difficult to avoid. Next up, we have this bridge with a bunch of the rolling eye enemies from stage 1, but this time, if we attack them when they're on the bridge, it'll actually explode and take out part of the bridge. Obviously, that means it might be better in some cases to simply avoid the enemies, but the downside of skipping fights here is obviously the more enemies on screen, the more the game slows down, and also trying to actually jump over them can be a little bit difficult with this much slowdown. But we made it through relatively unscathed. I'm actually kind of impressed, to be honest. Normally that doesn't go that smoothly for me. At least it didn't when I practiced this stage before. Next up, we have a fairly tricky jump here for an optional power-up, or in this case actually a 1-up, which will be very helpful later on. And to my understanding, if we actually go left here, we will soft lock. So do not go left there, you have to go right first and then left. If you soft lock, apparently you have to basically just restart the level by getting a game over. To my knowledge, there are infinite continues at least, so that's something. But that doesn't mean this game is easy by any means. If you don't get the invincibility cross there, I feel like it's very difficult to avoid that eye without taking damage because it lands like right behind you. So definitely make sure to get the invincibility there. Again, this is definitely a case where actually trying to reach that enemy without taking damage is a little bit tricky, but luckily we didn't take too much damage there. Now we have this enemy throwing like boomerang projectiles, but luckily if they go off screen, that actually despawns the projectile, so we don't have to worry about that one as much. That one we did take a little bit of damage, but it's fine. We can go up for some optional things, but I'll probably take a ton of damage on the way, so we're simply going to move on to the next boss. This boss is actually really annoying. Basically, they will appear from the holes on the wall and drop down and then start bouncing around. You do not want them to start bouncing, because as soon as they start jumping around, it gets increasingly difficult to actually fight them. If you have the fully upgraded Vampire Killer, the projectiles will damage this boss, so definitely try to attack from a distance and defeat them as soon as possible before they actually land on the field, and start jumping around and getting a lot more difficult to actually defeat. So far, so good. Again, the spawn points for the enemies have actually been very nice in this run, other than a couple of them appearing from the top. I think I got 2 with 1 attack, actually. 1 more to go. And this is where the difficulty really starts to ramp up. So far, we've made it through relatively unscathed, but I think that's about to change. This stage has always been the one that gives me the most trouble. We have to break that pillar because, one, we need to get past it, and two, it's also causing the area to, like, basically, like, collapse in on itself. We have to very quickly destroy this to avoid getting crushed by the spikes, and then make our way through here. We have a couple of candles, but because the ceiling is starting to sink, and the floor is starting to move up, I'm going to skip those items for now, just to be on the safe side. We don't need health because we're not taking damage. Spikes are instant death in this, so it's not really that helpful. Like, there's no way we can really even lose health up to this point without just instantly losing a life. And this is where things start to get really, really scary. We have rising spikes from below. My best advice would be to move quickly, but not too quickly. If you go too fast, you will basically hit the ceiling of the screen and fall. So you basically have to like wait till it scrolls up enough to actually have enough room to make specific jumps. One other thing worth mentioning is these enemies are actually really annoying without the vampire killer fully powered up. Because if you attack them, they'll basically roll up into a ball and start bouncing around. With the upgraded vampire killer, they're not a problem, but having to do this without the whip powered up definitely is not a fun experience, so I'm hoping I can get through this first try. But I'm also not feeling overly confident because this is a genuinely difficult section. I almost fell all the way down. This is actually really bad. In all honesty, I wasn't exactly expecting to get through this first try again. When I was practicing for this playthrough, this was always the part that gave me the most trouble. But yeah, attacking the enemies with the base vampire killer will just basically bounce them around, making it so you have to actually jump over them or take damage. Oddly enough, I actually don't mind taking damage here. The stage itself isn't that bad in terms of damage output, it's bad in terms of, like, instant death spikes. I guess you could say this is a difficulty spike in more ways than one, because this does feel noticeably tougher than what we've seen so far, and also we're dealing with literal spikes in this case. Even the rest of the stage isn't that bad. This is like the worst part of the level, by far. Partly because of these enemies, like, they're positioned in such a way that, like, you have to jump and use the attack, which is difficult when the game's actively slowing down because so much is happening on screen. Alright, so here I think we actually have to not drop down on that first platform and instead go up here. This is a really annoying jump. Again, you have to wait until the screen scrolls up far enough that you don't, like, bonk your head on the ceiling, because if you do, then you fall all the way down. I am amazed I saved that, but we now need to quickly make our way back over here. We had to wait for the screen anyway, so nothing of value was really lost by taking damage there. I didn't think I was going to make that jump, and guess what? We have to do that again now. Very carefully, making our way across, and now we have a few more of these little narrow platforms to get across to the top of this section. Again, I do consider this to be the toughest part of the stage. From here on out, it won't be as bad. It will still be a little bit annoying, but not nearly as scary. We do have to worry about a wall from the right side now. So we have to quickly make our way left this time. Dodging all of the, or getting through all of the enemies quickly, and also these, like, winding tunnels that are just kind of designed to slow you down, basically. Barely made that jump, it felt like. My biggest problem with this game is just how it feels like you get inputs in a lot by the slowdown. Like, you press the button, and then nothing happens because the game is actively slowing down when you press the button, so it doesn't register the input. Beyond that, the game actually isn't that difficult, in my opinion. But again, I am using the modded version, so that definitely is making a difference. If I had to fight all the bosses like without the fully powered up vampire killer, that would be a very different situation.